Inside one of the rooms of Joseph's mansion, the rich psychopath proudly unveils a severely amputated and tortured robot, which seems to be breathing. Zone 414 is a walled city of android and human-like robots that provide wealthy clients companionship and serve as prostitutes. David Carmichael, a retired detective, arrives at Vite Corporation, the company that runs the zone. He is going to be hired as a private investigator and receives his first test, where he is asked to shoot a woman inside a cage. She talks about hearing voices about the future and speaks emotionally about it. She kneels, staring into his eyes, but he shoots her in the head without hesitation. Then he peels the skin on the top of her head, and the woman is discovered to be a humanoid android as he removes some kind of device on the center of her head. The robot is collected, and David is set for a psychological evaluation. Joseph Vite, the psychologist of the Vite Corporation, comes into the room to carry out the next part of the test. Joseph begins his evaluation by asking him how he knew Jaden. The female robot, the short earlier and was programmed to evoke an empathic response, was a robot. David tells him that the company makes robots, and if she weren't, the Vite Corporation would have been an accomplice to murder.
Then you would be a murderer.
Then the Vite Corporation would be my accomplice.
Next, David was asked about the reason for his retirement. He was forced to retire after breaking protocol at the job when his partner was held hostage by an assailant, which resulted in the death of both his partner and the assailant. The evaluation was concluded after Joseph asked why he chose to do the job, since the company didn't use official channels. David said he needed the money but wouldn't do anything illegal. After the interview, David is taken to meet Marlon Vite, Joseph's brother and the inventor of the androids, who is also the owner of the Vite Corporation, at his house. Marlon tells him that the task is to find his daughter, Melissa, who has gone missing 3 weeks ago. David asks him why he didn't go to the place, but Marlon tells him he knows she is in Zone 414. Marin continues his explanation, saying he and his company have built a reputation for the zone to be one of the safest destinations for humans to interact with robots freely, and they charge millions for this service. Should news get out about the disappearance of Melissa, this balance would be destroyed. Marlon instructs him to bring back his daughter discreetly and without causing any incident for a price of £2 million. David is presented with a device that will help him get into the zone and provide him with everything necessary. Marlon suggests he should find Jane, a highly advanced, self-aware robot whom Melissa was fond of, to start his investigation.
But that's it.
Inside the zone, Jane, who works as a prostitute, is seen comforting a client who lost a woman he loves. She shows her ability to change her features according to her client's wishes, and she communicates with an artificial intelligence that runs her place. At the same time, David is seen getting into the zone in a taxi. He arrives at the luxurious hotel prepared for him, and as he relaxes with music, David looks out the window and sees the picture of Jane from a billboard far from his building. Jane receives news from an old woman who works for the Vite company that the earlier client doesn't want to see her anymore, but it was not because she failed at her job. He was satisfied and didn't want to ruin the moment. Jane is sad to hear this and questions why she feels like ending her life. The old woman tells her that she is programmed to feel despair because it attracts powerful clients. Then Jane talks about being scared because someone is sending messages to her, threatening to kill her. She identifies the voice message to be a male but doesn't know his name, and expresses feeling threatened, but the old woman suggests someone might be paying to make her feel that way. Jane asks if the person will be allowed to pay for the right to kill her, but the old woman assures her that Zone 414 won't allow such arrangements. After the conversation ended, Jane walked to her apartment. She takes off her clothes and walks to a mirror with a knife in her hands. She cuts her arm and synthetic blood flows as she cries, looking at herself in the mirror. But after falling down, she closed the cut and her skin healed quickly. She rises and meets David, who is coming up the elevator. At the door, he introduces himself and tells her he is looking for Melissa. She lets him inside and tells him that she last saw Melissa weeks ago, pretending to be a synthetic to piss off her father, whom she hates.
The last time I saw Melissa was weeks ago.
Jane mentions that they bonded over the fact that she wants to be a machine, not to feel anything while Jane desires to be a human, but she didn't see her recently. She thinks Melissa will be back home soon, but doesn't want to help David, mentioning that she has her own problems to deal with. David becomes curious and asks her what is wrong, and plays the recording of her stalker threatening to kill her. David proposes to help her with her stalker problem if she helps him find Melissa, and Jane agrees to take him to see Royale, a pimp who helps rich clients select robots for prostitution. Suddenly, while talking to Jane, David sees someone staring at her through her apartment window from the outside and goes after him. He comes out to the rooftop and chases him down to the parking space. Although he couldn't find the person, he found the camera left on the ground that showed the picture of Jane on its screen. David takes the camera and shows it to Jane, who says she feels terrified. Now that he has seen the guy, David assures her that he won't after her. Jane accepts David's offer to stay the night and to go visit Royale in the morning. Jane asks why he is trying to help her, but David tells her it is just quid pro quo. The next day, Jane and David visit Royale, who refuses to speak in front of Jane, claiming she can't be trusted. So after Jane leaves the room, she gives him the address of the person who might know the whereabouts of Melissa.
No.
Good. Don't trust her.
Before he leaves, David asks Royale about the person who stalks Jane, mentioning it may be someone who is paying to threaten her. She tells him she doesn't know about it. As soon as David leaves, Royale makes a call to the address she gave David, and warns them about the person coming for the girl. She orders the person on the other end of the line to tell him where Melissa is, but not to mention her name. Later, David and Melissa arrive at the address and they are allowed to come in. They meet with a rich man named George, who possesses 2 humanoid robots of his own. George says Hamilton, one of his robots, found her at the entrance of the building, pretending to be a synthetic robot. In the few hours she was there, George described her condition as lost and afraid. David asks him where she went, but George wants to trade the information in exchange for 2 hours with Jane. He says he doesn't want to sleep with her, but he intends to cause pain similar to his female robot sitting next to him. Suddenly, Jane breaks a glass she picked from behind her and holds it close to George's neck. She asks him where Melissa went, and he says Royale was the one who gave her to him, but he didn't know she was human. George tells them Melissa has disappeared from his place. Scared of Jane's actions, Hamilton speaks up and tells them she had gone to the boatyard, the zone behind the dump. At the boatyard, Jane and David find the door of a warehouse open. He asks Jane to stay outside and goes inside to investigate. He finds the body of Melissa hanging by a rope and the place is empty. Jane also comes inside and sees the body, but she gets scared and turns back running to the taxi. Next, David brings the body to Marlon, who considers the matter to be resolved. But David tells him he doesn't believe Melissa killed herself and suggests an investigation should be conducted into some of the clients. But Marlon doesn't want to lose his business by risking the reputation of Zone 414. David boldly asks Marlon to investigate Royale, but Marlon doesn't believe he is capable of comprehending the dangers of an investigation since he doesn't shoulder the responsibility of managing an empire. Marlon threatens him and David ends the conversation after asking for his money. Marlon tells him to finish the matter of his payment with Joseph in the morning, and David leaves the place in a taxi. Meanwhile, Jane speaks with Royale and asks her to take her feelings away, but Royale tells her that they didn't kill her and Melissa was the one who took her own life. Then, Jane goes to David's apartment and blames herself for Melissa's death. Although she knew about Melissa's repeated visits to the zone without Maron's permission, she didn't say anything. She was also the one who introduced her to Royale without mentioning Melissa was human. Jane begs David not to tell Marlon, fearing he will destroy everyone, but David tells her Marlon already pretends that nothing happened. David blames everyone for Melissa's death, including Jane, whom he accused of being an untrustworthy friend. She retaliates by accessing his files and mentioning the death of his wife, who died of an overdose of sleeping pills and didn't receive treatment after being diagnosed as a schizophrenic. He gets angry and almost strangles her, but he refrains and tells her he is leaving after tomorrow. She reminds him about her stalker. David goes to receive his payment from Joseph Veit the next day. Joseph transfers the $2 million as agreed. David talks about the death of Melissa, and Joseph thought the suspect was Royale.
Well, a job well done.
Then, David begins asking him about Melissa and Marlon. He accuses him of being a coward who hides behind his brother's empire and doesn't contribute much. Joseph defends himself, but he appears to be scared. The detective continues his deduction, saying Jane is Marlon's favorite one, and that Joseph got jealous and started stalking her to get back at his brother. Then, he flat out accuses him of killing, stating it to be the best way to hurt Marlon. Joseph denies killing Melissa, but David tells him he is certain about it. Joseph admits to being the murderer, saying, "I could kill you too." Then he takes David to another room and shows him a robot he tortured for his amusement. Joseph admits he likes torturing robots and tells him that Melissa found him hurting one of them. He killed her because she was going to tell Marlon, who would never forgive him if he found out. David was angry, but he couldn't do anything because he was not a cop anymore. He leaves after hearing Joseph contemplating to stalk and kill Jane. Shortly after, Joseph appears at Jane's apartment and toys with her. She picks up a knife to defend herself, but he freezes her using some device. He takes her knife from her hand and continues to scare her. Meanwhile, David, who was on his way out of the zone, gets out of his taxi and runs to rescue Jane, who is currently being tortured by Joseph. But she suddenly snaps out of her paws and holds Joseph by his neck. She beats him and knocks him around while talking about having feelings of pain, love, and hate. David reaches her apartment and finds Joseph on the ground. Jane asks him to shoot her and end her suffering, but he gives her his gun, which he helps her point at Joseph. Jane repeatedly shoots Joseph and kills him. David makes a recording for the Vite Corporation, saying that he didn't find Melissa in the zone, and instead claims Melissa is alive and has gotten back to her father. They warn him about the legal actions they will take if he criticizes Marlon or his company. After finishing the recording, David reminds Marlon, who was seen adjusting a robot that looks identical to Melissa, about their deal, which was allowing Jane to leave the zone. In the final scene, David meets Jane outside the zone with papers that will allow her to live in the outside world. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Watch our next videos on the screen, and don't forget for more amazing recaps. See you on the next one.